we can drive to and as long as there are roads and we can get to a location, we can drive there and within 15 minutes start generating our own power and communicate with satellites and able to upload and download information. And we also, in the U.S., we also have the ability to play TV stations, things like the Weather Channel and news stations, to get additional information. We are Move Mobile Vehicle. That's our acronym that we have created. And we created this so that we can provide communications like power to both victims and the volunteers. We are not a first responder. In other words, we don't rush into a location until it has been deemed safe by the police and the fire department or military or any other organization that does actually identify that. So not only do we help disaster volunteers, but more importantly, we use IEEE members to help us serve disaster victims and disaster volunteers. And so this gives us an excellent opportunity to showcase what IEEE can do. So our goals were based on, as I mentioned before, communications, energy, light, and information, to give comfort to survivors who may have no other outlet. After a while, your mobile phone will lose power. Perhaps even the cell phone network where you are will not be operational. And so with our ability to communicate with satellites, we're able to actually provide that information. We're also building a trained volunteer community in many of the cities and states that we deploy to. If you are familiar with the geography of the United States, we house our vehicle on the East Coast in a state called North Carolina. And we do have active volunteers who help us with the truck and the services everywhere from the state of Texas to Florida, all the way up to New York and over to Missouri. Unfortunately, because of the vast size of the U.S. and the fact that we have only one of these vehicles, we are pretty much relegated to the East Coast, mostly east of the Mississippi River, and we hope to expand that in the future. So how did this first come about? There was a hurricane called Sandy, and actually it was considered a superstorm because it brought in also, in addition to the hurricane, additional weather conditions. And there were a lot of people who felt isolated because of this. And in fact, one of the most hit areas was in New Jersey, which is the headquarters of IEEE. Now, people were without power and without communications for 10 to 12 days, and they were unable to find any information, especially after their mobile phones lost power, and of course, they had no power themselves. So they had no idea of what kind of services were available, where they could find food, where they could find fuel, and it was rather unnerving. So we did an investigation of what other organizations do this. In the United States, the government actually serves victims through an organization called FEMA. I think it's the Federal Emergency Management Authority. And they have vehicles and they have communications equipment, but most importantly, they serve a bunch or many of the people who are serving and working to help victims of these natural disasters, but they don't necessarily help directly the communications aspects for the victims of these natural disasters. There is a company called Cisco. You might be very familiar with their communications equipment. They actually have a couple of these vehicles. There's two pictures of them right here. And the Amateur Radio Emergency Services is an organization that does communications. We created some requirements that we wanted our device to handle. And first and foremost, we wanted to ensure that we could do charging of cellular phones so that survivors could get information if there was a cell phone network available. We also wanted to have available and pass on to victims all sorts of information about services available. In other words, we are in direct contact with those organizations that provide those services. It could be, in the case of India, the International Red Cross or International Red Crescent in other countries in the Middle East. There are also other sources of information, weather and news that we could find out information. And we could also provide a hotspot for people to use the internet so that they could communicate with loved ones to let them know that they're okay. There are several other requirements that we wanted to have. One of them was that we can operate without relying on power from any other source. So for that, we have an onboard, somebody is saying is on-screen mode. It's tiny now. Let's see. And I thought I was actually running this. So I'm going to ask somebody who's out there in the network, can you actually see a really big slide of this now? If you can see the really big slide of this, please let me know. Alrighty. Next slide and next slide. I will correct that in a minute. All right. Hopefully now you can see this. All right, I apologize for the problem with that. I thought I'd heard from people that they could see it really well. All right, so the requirement halves. So we wanted to make sure that we can operate anywhere that we were, and so we have an onboard generator. It runs with diesel power. We also have solar panels, or we wanted to have solar panel capabilities so that we did not have to rely on fossil fuels at all times. One of our requirements also was that we would have internet access, upload and download, and recharge battery packs or allowed to recharge people's mobile phones should they have the need. We also wanted to display television stations. We also determined that there were some things we didn't want, and so my daughter here is helping me identify some of the stuff that we did not want to have on the vehicle. We did not want to include toilet facilities. That brings its own problem if you have a driving vehicle with toilet facilities, primarily that you have to clean it and maintain it. We also didn't want water, sewer. And initially we said we didn't want amateur radio capability, although we have now changed that. The vehicle needed to be less than 26,000 pounds. That is the limit for driving in U.S. Highways where you don't need a special commercial driver's license to be able to drive the vehicle. So the volunteers who work with this need to take Red Cross training. They also need to take our government Federal Emergency Management Authority courses. so that we understand what happens in a disaster, so that we're able to talk the lingo and talk about the different systems that might be available for us. Now, we also don't always respond to disasters. We also do a lot of STEM activities. In other words, we help children understand science and technology by using the vehicle as a demonstration of that. And I'll show that in a few minutes. And we also go to public events and show off our technology. So as an example of our STEM outreach, we visit schools and we teach them, for example, if we know that a satellite is in a certain location in the sky, how would we be able to triangulate ourselves to be able to point the satellite dish to where the satellite is and thus get a better communication signal. We also have hands-on kits that kids work with. The one you see over on the left-hand side of the slide is a child who is making an electrical circuit with a couple of chips and a small battery, and that pen she's using is actually an electrically conductive pen. It puts down some metallic material on a card and allows her to make a circuit. In some of our visits to outreach activities, we've been to science festivals, and we've done such things as teach them how to make flashlights from simple around the house materials. We also, as I said, show off our vehicle. And in fact, in the picture on the right, we're actually showing the Weather Channel, which allows us really good information while we are on the road. By the way, the wires you see there are temporary. We actually put the wires in the wall of the vehicle. We just have those up temporarily. Now, we partner directly with the American Red Cross. The Red Cross provides us shelter, food, sanitary facilities for the volunteers that accompany the vehicle. The Red Cross also supplies diesel fuel so that we could run our generator, and they give us information that we can thus hand out. In turn, the Move vehicle provides internet access to Red Cross. Because very often Red Cross will come to a scene, and even though they have their own communications equipment, theirs takes a while to set up, or sometimes they don't even have the equipment yet. It's going to be arriving in a day or two. And since we drive and roll up, we have that communications equipment. As an example of what we would do in a disaster deployment, we provided complimentary Wi-Fi for shelter residents. And in fact, there was one situation where we recently provided Wi-Fi capability, and the people who were in a large school gymnasium, because that was where they were sheltering, their houses had been flooded out. They were able to use the internet to do homework because apparently the schools were still running, and the kids needed to use the internet to do their homework. We found that IEEE volunteers, when we assist the Red Cross and we assist these victims of natural disasters, really do appreciate the fact that IEEE volunteers know a lot about problem solving, which is really great because we are computer scientists and engineers, and we are taught to be problem solvers, especially with technology. And so we're always requested, because we are very knowledgeable about how to hook up networks and how to run wiring cables and how to configure, for example, a router so that it could serve as a Wi-Fi hotspot, but still have security on it. As an example of some of the things, we've been to fires in the mountains of Tennessee. One of my favorite pictures here is the one on the left-hand side, which shows that a company that ordinarily cans beer. That would be Budweiser. I believe Budweiser is a pretty popular brand in India as well. They also put water in cans, and those are available to people in natural disasters. And it is an easy way to get drinkable water, which may often be difficult in a disaster environment. And we get 2 thumbs up from Red Cross, and we're often called on to help with the distribution of communications equipment. So I guess the important thing is, well, let's find a little bit of technology about what this truck is. And so literally, it is a large commercial vehicle. The manufacturer is called Freightliner, and we have a Cummins diesel engine underneath the hood. This vehicle, we are lucky enough that it is not manual transmission, it is automatic transmission, which means I'll be able to drive it much more easily in India, right? Considering all the traffic jams that I have experienced in the past. We also have in this vehicle, you have seen pictures of it. It is a large box. The front cab seats 2, and in the back, we'll see pictures later, we can seat another 4 people. On the roof of our truck, we have some of the most important information, and that is, or some of the most important equipment. We have solar panels, so we are able to grab solar power and charge up batteries that we have in the vehicle. We also have a couple of air conditioning units, because very often when we deploy our vehicle, it is very hot, and of course the communications equipment inside needs to be at a lower temperature than you would see, much lower than the 37 degrees or so that we often are deploying in hurricanes during the summer. You notice that we also have some communications antennas up on top, including the large satellite dish, which is towards the bottom. And then towards the front, we also have that is a TV. So what's inside the truck? Well, primarily, it is a nice big office workspace. We have tables and chairs so that we can work in the field. In fact, the chairs are a bit padded because we also sit in these while we drive, and the regulations are that we need to ensure that we are seat belted in these seats. That's a law in the country of the U.S. And as I said, we have a total of 4 of these chairs in the vehicle. We also have several tables that are actually built into the vehicle itself. You see the one here in the center of the build, or the center of the picture. We can remove it if we want. This is also a pass-through that we can get to the cab where we drive. We also have a table towards the back, in which it does fold down. Plenty of opportunity to plug in power all throughout the vehicle, because as I mentioned, we are generating our own power, and we are able to plug in our laptops. We are limited right now for our plugins to the US standard of 115 volts AC at 60 hertz. And in fact, the space that we have, we're expanding to add another couple of desks, because we're finding we need lots more desks. So this office area allows us to lock in place while we drive. And as I mentioned, we have a pass-through to the cab. We also have over the cab storage space. One thing I would also like to add on is these chairs do swivel, and this is an earlier version, or an earlier picture. We added several more monitors throughout here so that we can perhaps play information on for our computers, or for the TV on any one of these monitors. We also have the option to attach one of the monitors to the outside of the vehicle and play TV stations, so that the general public can look at some of the information that might come across on the TV. If we look towards the back of vehicle, we have a lot of space. And actually, as you can see in the right-hand side, we've hauled a lot of extra equipment for the Red Cross. And actually, the space that you see here is going to be reconfigured soon. We have determined that there is a need often for us to sleep in the vehicle itself. And so this area that we have here in the back is actually going to be configured to have beds where we can have at least 2 people sleep in the vehicle and also have additional desk space and additional storage space above and below on both sides. Key to all of ours is that we have a Cummins 10 kilowatt commercial diesel generator. This diesel generator we've tested, and we pretty much can find that we'll be able to run this diesel generator for 7 days on the 100 gallons of diesel fuel that the truck carries. By the way, the diesel fuel that we use for the generator is the same that we use for driving the truck. But keep in mind, we also have solar panels. And we also have the capability of plugging into what we call shore power. So if we have a 220 volt connection to the outside world available, we have a cable that allows us to connect as well. We have power control panels that allow us to switch where we're getting this power from, whether we choose from shore power or we choose from the generator. And as I mentioned, we have a couple of air conditioners, and those require a lot of power. So sometimes we need to turn that on and off. We also have heaters in the vehicle. Don't use it as much, but we do have them available. We have LED lights inside, more efficient, and actually we have LED lights that run at both 12 volts as well as fluorescent lights that run at 115 volts. The 12 volt LED lights are running at 12 volts DC. This is a block diagram of the power that we have available for our vehicle. Specifically, we have 3 solar panels. Each one of them, I believe, are generating 48 volts, and we are using we're targeting 48 volts. I cannot remember at the top of my head the number of amps that it provides, but we have a solar charge controller as well as truck batteries, and we use the solar charge controller to feed the truck, the internal batteries, and these are separate than the vehicle itself. We have a battery charger as well that is allowed to, that we could use to charge the battery from our generator. And if you see up in the corner, we have both the Cummins generator, and it's a, I'm sorry, I said 220, it's a 240 volt shore power connector that we can choose it or the generator. And we can charge our truck batteries, and we can actually run quite a bit from our truck batteries. We have been able to run our communications equipment, but not the air conditioners. But we could run the communications equipment and light from our internal truck batteries for an entire day. So if we have a decent amount of solar power available, we're able to run our vehicle for a day and a half by capturing solar energy. We also have an inverter, which we use, excuse me, to be able to provide power to our truck box, which allows us to, excuse me, which allows us to plug in our personal computers as well as our communications equipment. This is a picture of some of our communications equipment, which allows satellite upload and downlink, and that provides our wireless and Ethernet communications. In particular, the satellite controller will actually identify where you are located. It will search for a satellite. It will search for the best satellite connection, point the dish to that location. So no matter where we are, as long as we have a clear line of sight to that satellite, in other words, as long as there's not trees or a building in the way, we can connect. Not shown in this picture, this is a little older, I should probably get a newer one, is that we have additional equipment for networking. We have some Cisco Meraki equipment that we use for our communications. Now, when we first started, we had what we thought was enough communications, but we're finding that a lot of other organizations, a lot of other people have other ways of communicating, and we wanted to be able to communicate with pretty much everyone. So we added a lot of extra types of communications, everything from a weather service radio to a router that allows us to not only use satellite communications for our data, but also a LTE router. So we're able to use the cell phone network for data. We have what's called citizen band radio as well. We find that in the US, a lot of people have that, as well as short range walkie-talkies allow us to communicate with each other up to about 300 meters. We also have public service scanners, and this is ham radio, which is the amateur radio network. So we did determine that eventually we do want to put up a very large antenna and communicate with other radio operators throughout the world, or at least in the area. And in the US, there is another network which is called FirstNet, which they allow emergency responders to access. Now, all of this communications equipment is inside of this 12-inch racks, and so this 12-inch, this pair of 12-inch racks has two sides. The left side is all of our communications equipment, as well as computing. We have a printer in there, and computers. We also have on the right-hand side, we have charging stations, and I'm going to show you a little bit of that a little bit later. We also have the ability to send cabling out of the truck, so we have this access to behind the racks, and we have actually used this quite a bit. We've sent Ethernet cables out this port to go into buildings or to go into a table where people have access to use internet to the outside world. Probably one of our most popular features, and I'm sure many of you have things like this, is power banks. And so we have purchased thousands and thousands and thousands of these 800 milliamp hour power banks. And of course, when you get these, they are partially charged. And even though they have a solar charging capability on them, the solar really does not charge it up very well. And so what we do is the truck, as it's running, has the capability to charge up 120 of these devices at one time. And one of the ways we do this is that we have lots and lots and lots of these trays where we are running through USB cables plugged into the charging device as well as into power. We're able to charge many, many, many of these at one time. And we hand these out, and hopefully we get many of them back. But they are rather popular with Red Cross volunteers, as well as some of the victims of disasters that we serve. So now we get to the point where it's like, this is cool, I want one of these too. So does anybody out there want one of these as well? That would be pretty neat to have, right? So how much did this thing cost? Well, we're looking at right now about $300,000, which if my conversion of the rupee is somewhere between 60 and 70, let me be on the conservative side and say 60 rupees to the dollar. That is over 1.8 million rupees. So this is not anything that is that million or is it 18 million? My math is a little bit off. That would be 18 million Indian rupees. It is not inexpensive, and there's only one of them. It's expensive to deploy, and even though it is mobile and you could drive around, it can't go everywhere. So perhaps something that would be a little bit easier, in other words, we have all of this capability. Is there a way to shrink this? And so one of the research activities that I'm doing is to create Modular Move. And it has the benefit of being replicated hundreds of times, and we hope that it could be replicated hundreds of times and deployed all throughout the world to perhaps IEEE sections, or maybe towns and cities might want to have one of these or a few of these, just to be able to have the ability for communications. Now, the nice thing about this is that since it is modular, you can adjust the power requirements or the communications requirements to fit your part of the world. And so we originally designed this to be several boxes, but through customer interviews, we determined that it would be better that if it was everything in just one single box, that would be great. And so the modules that we can have include power generation and storage, device charging, wireless networking, and satellite communications. Well, first thing is a box. And so this box, you'll see a little bit later just how big this is. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too heavy, but it is intended to be a bit rugged. And so this is a ruggedized version of plastic. Each one of these compartments holds different types of functionality, and you'll see a picture of this later. So they were able to use it for our internet communications, as well as power voltage conversion and storage. And so here is what it would look like when it is all full. One of the keys to this is over on this side, we like the Goal Zero expandable solar panel. And so we're able to take this panel, take it out of its case, and it unfolds to allow you to be able to gather solar power to charge this UPS storage device and converter. And so the converter itself will be able to supply whatever voltage you want. We have a version that supplies 115 volts. There are other versions that could supply 220 if that's what your communications equipment uses or your charging device uses. In this box, we have our internet communications device. Specifically, we're looking at the LTE router that I talked about earlier. In other words, using the cell phone network. There is another product which is going to be out. We were hoping it would be out this year, but it's going to be looking more like next year, where there is a blanket of low Earth orbit satellites, which will cover the entire globe, from pole to pole across the equator. And the antennas for this these communication satellites are about the size of one of these trays, maybe a little bit smaller. And so what we would hope is that we have the opportunity to inexpensively use these communications satellites for remote power, or I'm sorry, for remote communications, when the ability of a cell phone network or any other type of communications network is not available. So the future work that we have to look forward to is that not only has this project been highly visible and successful, we're able to engage people, and through all sorts of natural disasters, in fact, way too many this year. In fact, I just had a hurricane go over my head in my house yesterday, or I should say the remnants of the hurricane go over my head last night or yesterday morning. And we are just having way too many natural disasters. We need to have the ability to respond to a lot of them. So right now, the IEEE Move project is working with many people all around the world, including in India and Jamaica, to prove a international version which will be using either modular move, a smaller vehicle, or perhaps even a shipping container. And so the hope is that we can expand this to several places all throughout the world, so that you as IEEE members can volunteer and help out and serve in natural disasters that we are finding happen more and more frequently. If you have further questions for me, you can feel free to contact me. This is my contact information, and as you can imagine, that is probably somewhere in India. Well, as a matter of fact, it was outside of Chennai, and this cow seemed to like me, even though I didn't have any food. So this is my contact information. I'll leave that up. I'll show this slide really quick. If you want to find out more about the Move project, simply go to the website move.ieeeusa.org. Again, move.ieeeusa.org. And go back here to my contact information. And that is it for my presentation. I did allow 15 minutes for questions. And so if you do have any questions, I will pull up both the Q&A as well as the chat.
Please use your chat box right side corner and ask the question directly to Jim sir.
All right, so I have a good question right now. Is how secured are all systems described here, particularly from the point of view of implementation in military or defense applications? Well, first of all, I should mention that we don't do anything with any of the military or defense organizations. All of the disaster relief efforts are done by what we would call either civilian organizations, and that would be organizations that are not affiliated with government, or if it is a government organization, it is the organization for disaster recovery. Now, one thing I should also mention too. Now, you probably also asked for security, and so since we are using in our upload and download of the security information, since we are using the Cisco Meraki equipment, it is encoded for all the communications that are going up and down. Now, where it may not be encoded would be for the if we open it up to hotspots for people to use. And in fact, when we do that, we have a completely separate network for users versus our own use internally on the vehicle itself. All right, so hopefully I answered that question for the Q&A person. Somebody said, what is a basic theme? I think that you meant to say theme of Move project, and that is, the theme is of course disaster relief, mostly serving the communications needs of people who are affected, as well as volunteers who are helping people who are affected. And as I showed in the presentation, we have a lot of communications equipment. We're able to access the internet, and I'm not sure in the rest of the world, but in the U.S., there are plenty of opportunities for for assisting if you have communications or requesting help if you are able to connect with the outside world. You can request assistance, you can request additional equipment, request food, water, fuel, etc. All right, good questions. All right. So how the people and their location under in a disaster can be identified by Move if the mobile may not be working. So that is a good question, and it's I guess it's chicken and egg type of question, right? So almost entirely we are called out by the Red Cross. So when a disaster occurs, the Red Cross will pick up the phone and say, we need you at this city here. And so we will go to that city. Let's have a good example. There's a city in the United States called Jacksonville, Florida. And so let's say they'll call us up and they say, we need you in Jacksonville, Florida. And when we get there and meet with the Red Cross people, they're already there. And what we find is that the people who do need the assistance are going to the Red Cross shelters. In other words, a shelter could be a school where they have a large gymnasium that they open up, they set up beds, they have food service, and then we go there as well. So it's not like we're going to individual homes, but we are going to some of their larger facilities, maybe a location that has temporary tents. They also do that as well. So I hope that answered your question. Somebody had feedback link, and I'm not sure what that is, but I assume that that with all the presentations that we have, you are taking questions, or as you are doing evaluations, and we'll provide a link later, probably in the chat box. So that will be for the organizers to help answer that question. Any other questions in the chat box? I see no more questions in the chat box. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I would like to again thank you for the opportunity to talk about this this wonderful opportunity, or this wonderful project that we call Move. And I hope that in the future, when we are contemplating how we can serve the rest of the world, you consider being a volunteer. Somebody else had another question that just popped up for me. Oh, I guess I don't have another one. All right. I hope that and when it comes to the Move project in India, we have requested some funding for equipment and for coordination, and as soon as I said, we have requested, we haven't been granted that yet, and if we have the opportunity, we will make that available. Good question. Can we have the PowerPoints? And this is for the conference organizers. I can make my PowerPoints available for you to just to distribute out there. If you could let them know how they can get the PowerPoints, that would be great. And perhaps I could also say that if you want a copy of the PowerPoints, Otherwise, I am going to send this out to all attendees. I have provided to all attendees my email address. You can feel free to send me an email saying, can I have a copy of your presentation? And so I will send you a PDF in return. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. And I believe there is going to be a session coming up right after mine that uses the same channel. So we need to give them an opportunity to get on, right?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Unku, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Give the formal vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Honorable Speaker, Professor James Conrad, for sharing very valuable and information knowledge about the IEEE Move project, especially in the aspect of disaster relief in all around the world, and the various technologies they have used, like Wi-Fi, like solar, like different type of vehicles. They have used in the various different relief projects. So the information is very useful and it's very informative. So on behalf of the organizer, 5th International Conference on Computing, Communication and Automation, ICCCA 2020, I would like to thank you, sir, for your valuable time. So thank you very much, sir. I would also like to thank the conference chair and coordinators for their support. Last but not the least, I thank you all the attendees for their active participation in this session. I once again thank you everyone for this session successful. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. James, sir. Thank you, sir.